Hello, welcome to the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice Chair Chat. I am Lacey Durham, Chair of the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, and it is my great pleasure to introduce another session of our CRSJ Perfecting Democracy Leadership Discussion Series on voting rights and election protection as we look ahead to the 2025 election. Today, we are honored to welcome the incomparable Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr., President and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus Education Fund. Reverend Yearwood is a movement builder, a donor advisor, and an award-winning strategist and one of the most innovative advocates for civil and human rights, economic justice, and climate change and environmental justice. His work elevates the issues and impacts those that are most severely felt within the most marginalized communities. Reverend Yearwood also serves as senior advisor of the Bloomberg Philanthropies Beyond Petrochemicals campaign, as well as the host of the award-winning climate and environmental justice podcast entitled The Coolest Show. He is a White House champion of change for climate leadership, and according to the Rolling Stones publication, he has been dubbed as the new green hero. I must admit, his work is expansive and extensive in this space. He is chairman of the board for Green 2.0 and is a board member with several distinguished boards, including the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, the Third Act, the Evergreen Action, the Good Energy Project, as well as the League of Conservation Voters. Born in my neck of the woods in Shreveport, Louisiana, Reverend Yearwood's passion for civil and human rights led him to early iterations of hip hop politics meant to mobilize young voters. What started as a movement in 2004 to engage youth in the electoral process, the Hip Hop Caucus today has evolved into a nonpartisan, multi-issue organization that uses the power of hip hop culture to advance movements centered on those individuals first impacted and worst impacted by injustice. Through organizing and mobilizing local communities and partnering with artists and other creatives to amplify and energize movements, the Hip Hop Caucus brings the storytelling in hip hop to life through its daily efforts to strengthen democracy, stop and reverse the impacts of our climate crisis, as well as protect and expand equity and justice. As the only institution of its kind, nearly 20 years into the game, the Hip Hop Caucus is the largest it has ever been and leads the longest running and biggest nonpartisan hip hop voter mobilization campaign entitled Respect My Vote. Established in 2008, for over 16 years and across 7 election cycles, the Hip Hop Caucus has mobilized hundreds of thousands of young BIPOC voters through their award-winning Respect My Vote campaign, fighting against voter suppression and advocating for electoral system reforms. The multifaceted and integrated Respect My Vote campaign provides voter education, voter registration, get out the vote activities, voter protection, and issue advocacy with a special focus on returning citizens, which are a key demographic in this year's campaign. Reverend Yearwood's bio is far too extensive to capture in this introduction, so I urge you to review the link in the chat to gain a deeper understanding of the depth and breadth of our guest, Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr., and the amazing organization, the Hip Hop Caucus Education Fund. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Yearwood. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Cynthia Swann, who will moderate today's session. Dr. Swann is Secretary of the ABA's Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice and the Chair of the Perfecting Democracy Initiative, which aims to recruit lawyers and law students to support nonpartisan efforts to protect fair elections and voting rights at all levels. Dr. Swann co-hosts and co-chairs the ABA Task Force on Fair Elections and Voting Rights. She also has a presidential appointment to the ABA Environmental Justice Task Force as well as serves as special counsel to the Criminal Justice Committee. Additionally, she is a valued member of the award winning ABA CRSJ Human Rights Magazine editorial board. In addition to her ABA commitments, Dr. Swann is vice chair of the National Bar Association's Civil Rights Law Section and a member of the National Medical Association. Dr. Swann serves as Chief Administrative Officer to the amazing Hip Hop Caucus Education Fund and has facilitated the efforts to lead to the first ever strategic collaboration of its kind between the ABA and the caucus. We are so delighted to have both Reverend Yearwood and Dr. Swann. We look forward to having an engaging discussion.
Thank you. Thank you to our section on civil rights and social justice chair for those kind words of introduction. And thank you, Reverend Yearwood, for taking the time from what I know is an extremely busy schedule to participate in this chair chat and discuss the significance and influence of organizations such as the Hip Hop Caucus on the important issues that are impacting our marginalized BIPOC communities broadly, and specifically as we look at the future of our democracy coming into this election cycle. To our audience, it is an honor to share in full transparency that I work for the Hip Hop Caucus, where Reverend Yearwood is our fearless yet humble leader, and it is truly a privilege for me to be a part of the organization under his visionary leadership, but also to have him to join us on this platform going forward. Rev, I am going to open with some questions for you.
Awesome.
And I look forward to us taking it deeper as you help the audience to understand the role of the organization, the role of the vision for the organization, and how it really has a significant impact on the future, really, of our democracy when you consider that it is the youth, those in the culture, to understand their role and why it's important that they engage. But I would like to start with looking back at the past 20 years, and the Hip Hop Caucus has just celebrated its 20 years. As you look at the past 20 years, what inspired you to build this organization centered on hip hop as a form of cultural and political expression? And how did you envision its role in uplifting our marginalized communities?
Well, first and foremost, Dr. Swann, folks don't know, if they don't know, Dr. Cynthia Swann is a treasure for the civil rights community. You have been just a long-standing just beacon for ensuring that our voices are heard, as we would say at the Hip Hop Caucus, both in the streets and in the suites. And so thank you for just your continued leadership and all parts of your run and legacy. And we appreciate you so much. You are one of the few people I know who both is an Esquire and also has a medical background, plus just does everything else. So you're just a blessing. I think that's part of Hip Hop Caucus's beginning is that it was key to us that people could use their cultural expression and they would respond differently to the cultural call than the political call. And I would see artists in particular, rappers, as people call them, or dancers or whoever, showing up, and people would have a joy on their face. It'd be like a light, a beacon. And the audience building would be quite easy. You would tell them this artist would be there, or that performer, or that dancer, or that beatboxer, and people would show up from miles and miles away. But then when you say about policy or legislation, it'd be the same group of people. It'd be those who love policy and love legislation and love talking about it. But it would be the same people. And then the idea of those other communities not being engaged or understanding it would be missed. So the idea of Hip Hop Caucus was, what happens if we join those two things together? What happens if we use one's cultural expression to shape one's political experience? What happens if we actually use the power of culture to audience build, but also the power of policy to educate and bring those things together for liberation and freedom and justice? And
Mhm.
so that was the beginning of the Hip Hop Caucus, and that was 20 years ago. I was working with a number of artists who were doing Get Up to Vote campaigns. And it's clear after that cycle that in 2004, that more was needed, that we understood that either you shape policy or policy shapes you, or we were not really engaging in legislation. So while the music form or the art form was political, it wasn't really dealing with politics. And so Hip Hop Caucus was born in 2004, now 20 years ago, which is also a testament to a predominantly Black, Brown, Indigenous, young people led organization being around for 2 decades in this 21st century means that something was truly blessed when it first got started.
Well, I agree with you, Rev, on that. And as you reflect on the last 20 years and the public policy victories that the organization has been involved in, and the movement as it is gained, it gains momentum, the momentum falls back, and then we gain some more, and then we fall back again. And I remember at one of our events, someone said that the movement is strong when the music is strong.
Yeah.
And I would like for you to, that really resonated with me. And so as we think about that and the movement that we know we must start to move forward at this point, what would you say needs to happen to make certain that becomes our reality as we're moving forward now?
Yeah, I think there's a second part to that, and it goes, the first part you said quite well, when the movement is strong, the music is strong. But there's the other part to that, which is when the movement is weak, the music is weak. And so I think that part is also equally important. So when people come to me and say, hey, why is this music not about liberation or justice or about freedom? I usually just say, because sometimes the movement is also not really identifying those things as well. I would say there are a couple of things these past 20 years. The first thing I think is that we need to do a better job of ensuring that we have long-standing institutions. It's really just a blessing. The caucus has made it 20 years, to be honest. I think there are very few, unfortunately, not many civil rights, environmental justice, economic justice type organizations that have lasted that long in the 21st century. And I think that really goes into really the resources and infrastructure. So the first thing I think that we need to look at is that how are we resourcing? How are we building infrastructure for the civil rights movement of the 21st century? I think that's the first thing that I think that needs to be addressed. The second thing that I think that has been our kind of our pillar in our cap has been around communications. I think that, things have changed. The Bull Connor of the 20th century is very different than the Bull Connor of the 21st century. As a matter of fact, I would say, since we're talking to the ABA, I said our generation is not fighting Bull Connor anymore. We're fighting the descendant of Bull Connor, more known as Bull Connor Esquire. And Bull Connor Esquire is, as you know, very versed on litigation, on the court process, understanding the long game, so to speak, understanding what needs to be done. And so I think that this movement has to communicate that and understand and communicate to the community what that means to deal with a much more sophisticated, much more long-standing person who wants to take away our rights. I think the third thing is very important, is that it means that we need to, I've noticed over the past 20 years that our movement can be very siloed. And sometimes we can have almost what I would call, this could be oxymoron, but a siloed progressive movement in which sometimes we put our issues in different buckets. So we'll put human rights in one bucket, we'll put queer rights in another bucket, put women rights in another bucket, civil rights or rights around for people of color, another bucket. And even within those buckets, there's other buckets. And I think that a lot of times we're fighting with the same enemy. That was actually one of the things with Project 2025 that people realized, wow, this is one book, but we're all in this book together. We don't have our own book in this process. And so I think that if we can break the silos, I think it's such an important thing, and realize that we are all dealing sometimes with the exact same entity that wants to take away our rights in the 21st century, that wants us to be reverted. I think there was, for many people in this community, in this country, May 17th of 1954 was not a great day. They looked upon that as Brown v. Board of Education and says that our government has gone too far. And since that time, they've been fighting relentlessly to reverse that. And they're doing that in every way they can. So I do think that we have to be mindful. These are folks and communities that don't want to see a beautiful, as we would say, beloved community, a community where it's Black, white, brown, male, female, all of God's children coming together. And so I think our work for civil rights in the 21st century definitely is needed and continues.
Thank you for that, Rev. And so as we talk about our rights, and we start to speak about the fact that we know that they are being eroded in many areas, and we also know that we have a critical election that's coming up that stands to define our democracy in many ways, depending on outcome. But we also know that we have to engage in a way that we've never engaged before. The Hip Hop Caucus has the Respect My Vote campaign, which has been running for 16 years. And you are engaging young people in marginalized communities across this country. How are you keeping this campaign relevant? And how did it manage to remain relevant over the 16 years, but this year specifically, it is bigger and stronger? How have you done that, and what are you expecting to see from this campaign going into 2024?
Well, there are two parts to that. I think the Respect My Vote campaign, which is an amazing, award-winning campaign for the Hip Hop Caucus, which is the long-standing hip hop campaign in the world, and has won world records for getting out the vote. This year, it has the opportunity to do something where there is a person of color who is running for the top ticket. And while I'd say nonpartisan, even we say post-partisan, because obviously a large swath of our community are people of color, both Republican, both Democrat, and a lot of independents in there as well. I think there is a concern that they realize that there's a feeling of going back. There's a feeling of rolling back rights. And so there is a concern that can voting still be used to change that? There's a lot of things being put forth to undergird that, to take away the issue of democracy. And that's why this election is so important. But for Black people, we've had numerous elections that are important. And some elections are elections that we couldn't even vote in. Obviously, the ending of the Civil War, the time right around Reconstruction, obviously dealing with segregation, when we could vote, but also dealing with poll taxes and all kind of voter suppression. We are in a point where I think that we are dealing with this process differently. Again, I think that there are many tools that are being used to do voter suppression. We're seeing a massive disinformation campaign that's being put out there. AI, artificial intelligence, is being used in ways that we never even could imagine being used to really take down one's ability to vote and where to vote. So we have to kind of meet the moment. So Respect My Vote is still that. The slogan of Respect My Vote is still very relevant, as it was when it first started, as it is now, to respect my vote, to make sure that our vote is respected and our vote can be cast, to be honest. And so we're doing everything we can to ensure that communities who have the most to lose in this election by the rolling back of their rights, their voice can be heard. And so we're doing everything we can to protect vulnerable communities, to ensure that folks' voice is being heard. And beyond this election, that the issue of political education, if there's one thing that was clear, is that there was just, oh my goodness, there was a drought of political education with people not understanding what is being done for them in regards to policy, in regards to legislation. And so we at HIPAA Caucus know that post this election, we have our work cut out for us, that we have to do everything we can to be going around to communities to educate them again about the basics of civics, the basics of democracy, and the importance of understanding how policy and legislation works in these United States of America.
Thank you for that, Rev. So can you tell me that, or can you give me more insight as we approach this election season? What is your message to young people, especially those who feel disillusioned by the political process, those who are saying, I don't think I'm going to vote, those who are saying it's not for me, it doesn't matter? What's your message to them in terms of why it does matter and what they need to do to ensure that not only them, but their families, their communities are engaged and get out the vote?
Yeah, well, voting is the most important tool that you have. You have the same vote as a billionaire or as somebody who's hanging out on a corner. Everybody has the same ability to vote if they meet the requirements to do that. Meaning, in some places, some people are returning citizens coming home from jail, and so there are other requirements. But even with that, a lot of times you can vote. So you should make sure go to respectmyvote.com to check out if you can make it, because we want everyone who's returning home to be able to vote. With that being said, I would just say that for me particularly, we have a number of issues at the Hip Hop Caucus. One of the issues is around climate change. I mean, this has been just one of the wildest election seasons just from that. I think Mother Nature is doing her own PR and being like, listen, we are in a climate crisis. And so our prayers obviously go out to those impacted from Helene, from Milton, the wildfires, the droughts, the heat waves in Phoenix that eclipse almost 100 days plus of 100 days way into October. I mean, I can go on and on and on. And so I think that for this election, the impact of putting forth strong climate legislation and ensuring our transition from fossil fuels to clean energy, that part of this election is this critical. And so I'm hoping that people understand their vote matters for their future. If you're a young person, if it's bad now in 2024, then what does this look like in 2044 or in 2064? And so right now is the time to make your voice heard. But in other issues that we've always championed for, from civil and human rights to economic justice to women's rights and many other issues, it is important for us to know that all those things are on the ballot. All those things are trying to be rolled back. And so your voice and your vote matters. I think people would say it matters if you're in the swing state or that state. That's not the case. It matters everywhere, because up and down the ballot, particularly from the federal, the state, and local levels, your voice must be heard. And so it's as important for many of you, not just who's president, but who is the judge in your community, who's the state attorney. Those are critical things. And so a lot of times our community is crying after the fact. I can't believe that so-and-so got elected to that position, and it's clear they didn't like us and we put him in office. Yes, we put him in office because we didn't vote. So you can have an opportunity to make sure that your school board or your city council, your mayor, all those things are quite important for your voice. And I would say this, there's a reason we fought for those who are 18 to be able to vote. That wasn't always the case. And so it's important that if you can go to war, we need to have your voice. And your voice is critical right now. So all the new 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds who haven't voted before, this is your time to make your voice heard right now. And what is probably one of the most important and critical elections this country has ever seen.
Thank you, Rev, for that. You know, we know that young voters are often seen as key drivers of social change. You've named a core piece that we know is at the fore of the conversation, really: environment and climate change, major concerns for younger voters, education, jobs, another serious concern.
Health, yeah, oh, yes, across the line.
Healthcare is critical. We also know, and Hip Hop Caucus is a leader in the deaths in custody work that's
Okay.
out. How do we begin to, again, have young voters understand that all of these issues are critical to their success, to their future? And so, therefore, these are the reasons why, if they want change in policing, then they have to vote. If they want recognition of the impact of climate change and health disparities, they have to vote. The intersectionality that many young people, especially from our marginalized communities, face is something that we have to figure out how to elevate. How does the Hip Hop Caucus, with the culture of hip hop, how do we get the word out? What platforms are we using in order to ensure that these issues are elevated to those who are actually listening to their own genre, to their own culture, to their own leaders? How are we elevating that work?
Well, one of the things there, I think, with hip hop is that we have some of the most amazing storytellers. That's one of the great things about hip hop. Matter of fact, we had some folks who did a rap when they were 18. They're still rapping it when they're 60. That's how good that story was. And so he could tell a good story. It could go on for about 40 years. So we need that storytelling ability in this situation to particularly talk about issues like deaths in custody. For folks who don't know, deaths in custody is when you are in the police custody or you within the legal system. And anytime you engage from initially your lockup, so to speak, to the halfway house, you are under some kind of supervision and in custody. And if you die during that time frame, under any kind of means, it could be natural or unnatural, then before there was no way to understand that. So we would see things caught on cell phones sometimes, and it would just, and I would also say protect yourself, which you're watching as well. But sometimes we would see things that are on cell phones that people should not see. Someone being killed before their eyes. But then people would die also in prisons or in jails or in halfway houses. And we wouldn't be able to count that. And so one of the great things, Dr. Swann, who's here from the caucus, and Dr. Roger Mitchell from the board of Hip Hop Caucus, and many, many others, definitely pull together a number of tools to begin to look at that. Even put together a podcast, Official Ignorance, which actually was up for NAACP Image Award. And so it's just, and you can still listen to it. It's an amazing podcast, Official Ignorance. But I would just say that using the tools like the podcast, using tools like literally going up to the White House or to government officials, using tools as far as creating really cool marketing things to just bring awareness that things like the death certificate need to have a checkbox on it. And so just doing things like that was just such an important vessel for us to make sure that if somebody is incarcerated in whatever stage of the process and they die, we should know that. We would account that so that if numbers or data or the research from that data shows that there is a significant spike in this part of the country, or there's something that people are dying suspiciously in this part of the community, then we can deal with that. We can now know, we can investigate that, we can research that, and then we can hold those accountable if something was done wrong. That is the importance of the Deaths in Custody campaign with Hip Hop Caucus. And I'm so proud of that campaign. I'm so proud that that's one of the campaigns that really has just done some amazing work. Shout out to Dr. Swann and the whole team. But that's just been an amazing, amazing campaign. And it's one in which the movement for Black Lives was so important, from George Floyd and Sandra Bland and so many who we saw publicly killed. It actually brings another lens to that of how to hold departments measurable and accountable for their actions when done unjustly.
Thank you, Rev. We are at the ABA, we are leading a Perfecting Democracy initiative, and that initiative is focused on lawyers being better and more engaged in the voting process, from being, whether they're poll watchers, whether they're there for other reasons, whether they're post-election, ensuring voter rights, voter suppression they're addressing all of these issues. At the same time, we have a lot of young lawyers. They're coming through law schools. They're young lawyers, they've just been barred. All of these young folks who are eager to be engaged in this process around voting rights. So what is your ask of young law students and early career lawyers in the fight for democracy, racial justice, and civil rights? What would be your ask of them as they determine what they want to do and what their role should be in this democracy?
Yeah, that's an important question. I would say for young lawyers, never forget that you are a part of a profession, and it's very different. You are right there with the preachers, the doctors, and the lawyers, in which there's a certain amount of accountability for yourself. You are given information, and put to hold that private in many cases, because of your positioning. You are in a position to, many cases, be a judge later on, or in certain pieces to make decisions for one's life. And so I think that you can never forget that your profession is one of high regard, and one that you must take seriously. That's also coupled with the fact, if you're a person of color, usually dealing with civil rights issues, that matter who you may be, from the queer community, from the Black community, from the brown community, from the indigenous community, no matter where you come from, in that process, that there's a double expectancy from you, that we expect you to fight, to use your gifts, use your ability to ensure that this system that is sometimes so unjust on so many different levels can be held accountable and fair, no matter what side you're on, either from the prosecution side, from the defending side, whatever side may be on, but to use your standing and your position and not just be about money. I think too many people in professions, from doctors, from preachers, my crew, and from lawyers, sometimes forget about that. It's not about the dollar, it's about the person. Never forget that. And I guarantee you, if you put the people first, you will do well in life. I'm telling you, that's my promise to you. If you never forget about the people, there will be some rough days, that will come along with that process. But I tell you, it will be the most fulfilling career at the end. And we need attorneys who have not forgotten about the people. So young attorneys, remember your profession, remember your calling into this profession, and never forget about the people who need you right now more than ever in the 21st century to stand up and fight for their rights.
Rev, thank you. It is so important for young lawyers to understand that their legal skills and activism is going to be very critical as we start talking about systemic change. As we think about your legacy, the legacy of your organization as it has celebrated its 20th year, what do you see as the future of the movement you've built? What's the next frontier for using hip hop to empower marginalized communities and influence public policy?
Well, I think the one thing for that with the Hip Hop Caucus is, again, it's here and it's been around. I think the legacy will be based upon the fact that it lasted more than 20 years. Hopefully it'll get 21 and 22 and keep moving in that direction. But I think that's the first thing, that it now has become the longest running cultural organization in United States history, from the standpoint of using hip hop as a political tool. Nothing has even come close to having 20 years of service. I think for me, the most important thing is that this has changed lives, from folks who know Hip Hop Caucus or don't know. And also it has helped people to have longer lives. I think that fighting off against petrochemicals, against dirty air and dirty water, fighting for better health system, better education systems, has allowed for people to simply live longer. And I think that's the most important thing, because you can get 1 or 2 or 3 more years of life you can spend with your family or your friends or just with yourself. That's a blessing. And so I'm very happy that the caucus has done that. And that to me is our legacy, is that prayerfully, as the caucus has been around, people have lived longer because of this organization. And that to me is the most powerful legacy that any institution can have. And I'm privileged that the caucus has done that in spades.
Rev, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I know from experience just how tight your schedule is, so I know what it takes for you to do this. This conversation demonstrates to our audience why the Hip Hop Caucus Education Fund has a unique collaborative relationship with the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. Your reflections on the origins and lasting impact of Hip Hop Caucus, but of hip hop as a genre, as a means of cultural expression, along with your invaluable insights on voting rights, public policy, democracy, the future of advocacy for marginalized communities, all of these things. That is why the Hip Hop Caucus is so intimately engaged in the civil rights section of the ABA and in the broader civil rights community. So this is not only a timely conversation, but also deeply inspiring as we work to empower, engage the younger voter and create a more just and inclusive future. So I would like to personally thank you.
Thank you.
For joining and taking the time today, and offer you an opportunity to give any closing remarks you may want to give around the work, around what you do, around just the incredible impact of the caucus and the vision of the caucus.
Well, I want to say again, thank you, Dr. Swann, for this conversation. It's definitely a blessing to be across the desk, so to speak, from you. I would also just want to thank the ABA, the American Bar Association. One of the biggest things, my shirt says the caucus, if you can see that, but and it's kind of like it's kind of a nice, kind of a nickname for the Hip Hop Caucus. But when Hip Hop Caucus first started, there were many people who didn't want us to be called the Hip Hop Caucus. They felt that, you won't be taken seriously, you won't have this. And it was interesting for me because at that time, I had, a bunch of degrees, I've done okay in life in that regard. But I realized, in the words of, Faye and Lou Hamer, ain't nobody free until we all free. And so, I appreciate the ABA. I appreciate them for not thinking it robbery to partner with Hip Hop Caucus. Hip Hop Caucus, I think, robbery to partner with ABA. I think it's so important for us to come together in the 21st century and not to feel like, we're putting on the airs, but to really unify ourselves for justice. And I think if we do that, there's nothing that can stop us. So this is an example of what we can do, but we have so much more to do, and the stakes are so high. So thank you, Dr. Swann. Thank you to the ABA. Thank you to all the young lawyers, to all the lawyers in general who are using their craft to fight for justice. But more importantly, thank you for being a part of this movement for humanity. Because at the end of the day, when we've passed on and moved, I would say, across the Jordan, hopefully our works will speak for us. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rev.